Hi, Berenice. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us on the Moonlook conversation. How are you doing?
Hi, Agnes. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing very, very great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So today, Berenice, on the Moonlook podcast, I want to talk about your specialty, and I want to talk about your book. Would you mind? Would you care to introduce yourself?
Okay. Um. So my name is Bernice Asein. I'm a fashion lawyer based in Lagos, Nigeria. I am the founder of the Fashion Law Institute, we're the first institution dedicated to fashion law and policy on the African continent. So we basically play around advocacy, build community, access to legal services, pro bono, and also education, right? We primarily just help brands in assessing legal services. I mean, a lot of times we see that people complain that lawyers are too expensive, it's hard, there's no regulation, there's no representation for African brands when it comes to policy conversation. So we really help with that at the Fashion Law Institute. So broadly, that's what we do, or that's what I do basically as a fashion lawyer.
This is fantastic because I think that one of a big part to growth to any market and any business is the legality and how you're going to set it up. It's one
Yeah.
thing to have an idea, it's a second thing to execute it, but often entrepreneur overlook the side of the administration and the back office. So I want to discuss a little bit. Um, I want to discuss a little bit about the economic and the growth market potential of the African continent because we often talk about the continent, and of course we're gonna go a little bit locally. But I think that few country like West African country share the same problems. To be honest, so from your perspective, how would you say that intellectual property or legal structure could contribute to the economic upscaling of Africa's fashion or beauty and the creative industries?
Oh, I mean, integrity is very important, right? I remember when we first started having the conversation on IP protection in the fashion industry. A lot of times people are like, oh, fashion industry, the creative industry shouldn't exactly have strict protection by the law. But the truth about it is that for anybody to invest in a particular business, you have to show that you own the assets in that particular business, right? And if you start identifying the assets in any creative business, from fashion to beauty to design, you would realize that what the core asset of those brands are actually their intellectual property, how that they can exclusively own that right, and they're able to also maximize the benefit that comes from that. Now, for you to have ownership and exclusivity, to be able to recoup your funds that you research to bring up that creative idea, you obviously have to protect and register. The law has to say that you have that exclusivity and stop everybody from. So a lot of times when you read a lot of reports, you would see that a lot of businesses would say one of the reasons why we've not received investment is because our business is very diluted, generic. Everybody can just duplicate what we have. However, if businesses are guaranteed certain protection by law, right, and the enforcement of that right is taken seriously, you'll be surprised that you would see that a lot of investment in African brands would increase. But because we see that there are no peculiarities, we're not seeing any protection, any backing, right? It's almost as though a fashion brand will start today and you can see various people copy that same design. It becomes very difficult to say, I want to monetize. If you also look internationally, one of the things that people sell nowadays is not just the product itself, is the brand, is their idea, is what they bring to the table, right? And all of those things are protected. They are able to have it for as long as 100 years because they have intellectual property protection, right? So it's that important to the foundation of your business. The business can exist without intellectual property, so to speak.
So I want to ask you then, how is it easy to achieve when we live on the continent?
How is it to achieve?
Yeah, how is it easy to achieve to protect your business, your intellectual property? What are the structure already there in order to make it happen?
Yeah, so a lot of countries across Africa has the intellectual property office where you can register your trademark, your design, um, your rights, copyright, whatever rights you believe that you have. There are already structures, the bare minimum already exists. However, the accessibility of it is quite difficult for African brands. You can't compare it to Europe or the US, where there's a strong database and the administration of rights and the protection registration across that continent or that country has been harmonized and easy to access to everyone. On the African continent, we see that it is quite different because we have a lot. I mean, we have over 50 countries on the African continent. So it's quite difficult for us to harmonize. Although we have the Africa trade, free trade area, but they're still working on the harmonization of that registration or that particular process. So it's quite difficult really for brands to register. Nationally, yes, it's easy. But the truth about it is that we now operate in a global market where I am a brand, fashion brand in Lagos and I'm selling to somebody in South Africa. However, I'm not protected in South Africa. How do I extend my protection to those regions or those countries? Although there are treaties that have been entered into, but again, the accessibility in terms of administration and also the cost of it is quite steep for a young fashion brand. So this is where we see issues around protection of intellectual property in terms of the administration.
Okay, so you just named one of the challenges is the cost of it. Is there any other challenging that make it really complicated apart from having a high price?
Yeah, so also just assessing it generally, right? So there is the French-speaking, countries of Africa. We have the OAPI region, we have the Aripo region, right? And these are like countries who have come together to say, oh, we're going to be protected under this, law. Now, if you do not have a business sometimes in that region, even though you're on the African continent and you're an African, you cannot necessarily access those particular registration. And that's where the problem is really. Unlike in the EU, where once you have a business in a particular country, right, you can register a trademark across, the European Union. It's not like that here. We have different factions on the continent, and a lot of countries have not even. I mean, the existence of that faction makes it easy. However, a lot of countries have not even accepted to join. For example, top markets like Lagos, like Nigeria, for example, is not party to any of those treaties. You have South Africa; they also, operate in isolation, right? So it's almost like, yes, it is expensive, but even if you want to pay, what's the process like? How do I assess it? That means I have to go start from, having a business physically present in that country. And that makes it very difficult for some fashion brands because they can really, again, afford that and also afford to be in that particular location. But they sell to those, their customer base exists there because they sell, to people who order online.
Well, that is very interesting. That's very interesting because if there is no some sort of consensus or treaty among the West Coast African, the English speaking, the French and the French speaking, it leads us into something else. It leads us into the question of competitiveness and dynamics,
Yeah.
right? How can an indie African brand remain competitive when operating in global markets dominated by established multinational, when already locally they can't necessarily protect themselves? Does that make sense, my question?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, I think I get it. I think for independent brands, right, for them to compete globally, I genuinely believe that it is really tapping into our. Can you hear me?
I'm here. It's cutting off, but I am here.
Okay. I think that's okay. So I was saying that
Just at three. 1, 2, 3.
okay, so for African brands or independent brands to compete globally, I think it is more of tapping to our unique story as African, right? We need to look inwards and ask ourselves what unique value do we bring to the global markets that, no other person is bringing to the table. Our culture, our history, our heritage, it's something that is very unique to Africans. So if we're bringing that to the table, we can we can be competitive in our offering because we are bringing something unique, something peculiar to us, our intellectual property that is finding expression in the products that we have, our heritage, right? But I mean, when we try to copy and imitate what the West is doing, it makes us really, I would say it makes us not exactly competitive because they have done it over the years and they're better at it. They've grown their skills in it. So we have to look inwards. We have to introspect to ask ourselves what unique value are we going to bring to the global market as a fashion brand, and how can we carry the African identity in the products that we make.
Okay, that's really interesting. I'm learning so much because me, based in London, have such an idea of how things have to be done. I'm French, living in London, worked in fashion in Paris. So, I've got all this idea and I understand the process of the big house in Paris. I understand the process in London. And it's true that when it comes to the African continent, to the West Coast, to the West Coast, and then the French speakers and the English speakers, it's so different, and yet you're also close, and it really feels that like cross-border collaboration could be way more, not even encouraged, but supported, strengthened, if you had some more etatic support. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
To simplify things.
Yeah.
It seemed that what stopped those collaboration is really the lack of state coordination.
I feel like we need to be coordinated. We need to be self-organizing. We need to be able to bring ourselves together and say this is what we really want and this is our value. I think that's where we have a problem in just coming together and collaborating and working together to see how that we can bring something unique out there. But we don't do that. We don't collaborate as much. We talk about it every single time on how that we want to collaborate. We want to collaborate, but actually collaborating is where we are still far from. It's what I see from where I sit.
And then so we understand that all those processes have made collaboration really, really, really difficult. Is there any brand that you would have in mind that you would think has succeeded as that? Has been able to remaining close to their African identity, protecting their brand, trading abroad, and being strong back home as well?
Yeah, we have a lot of African brands that are doing amazing, right, in terms of protection. We have Diana Sego, we have Tonguru from South Africa. They've done amazing in, constantly always, exporting their products. I mean, we've seen Beyonce wear their products. However, more than that, when there is like an IP infringement on your product, they don't keep quiet. They talk about, people replicating their designs, right? We have other brands, doing a lot of things, right? But the problem is, are they exporting? Yes, I believe that a lot of African brands are, being born internationally. But will I say they are taking advantage of registration and protection? Not exactly, not many of them. We don't see, I mean, we are still, if you look at the jurisprudence in Africa when it comes to legal issues, right? We don't see a lot happening in that regard. We don't see a lot of push for registration. We don't see that conversation happening as much as we want to see it. Although now in 2025, the conversation is changing because we are seeing that it's important for us to even protect our cultural heritage. We're seeing that I mean, once a fashion brand puts out a particular, design, or you see that there's maybe elements of African heritage or culture, and now it's making us very conscious of the value that we have, and we're talking about protection. But as that aside, I don't think that registrations, IP conversation are really, really, really taken into consideration by African designers, right? But now things are changing. A lot of money is, I say people are making funding available. There's a lot of advocacy in the space, and we're seeing that there's conversation around educating brands to, protect and also register, and then also speak up when there is an infringement, maybe from a global or international brand. And,
So yeah, that's why I want so those brands who are best on the continent, who maybe, I don't know, maybe don't really understand or can't really afford, or maybe they even think that it's more expensive than what it is, to protect their design. If they were to go through that path, if they were to be like, okay, we're going to take this very, very, very seriously, and we're going to protect all our design, what would it change for them? What would be, yeah, how would it transform their business?
Yes. So like I mentioned earlier, right? IP is the core of your business. Basically, when you look at a fashion business, one of the things that they are trading, right, is their intellectual property. So again, you cannot have a business without protecting those assets. Those things are precious. Your brand identity, your brand name, your design. Those are the products that are core. So if you're going to be transacting on a daily basis, right, you're going to be exchanging value. You want to be sure that you own the core of your assets, basically. So yes, it's going to really help them in raising funds. A lot of times we're seeing a lot of venture capital coming, and they are focusing on, the creative economy. And one of the core questions during due diligence process is, do you own your intellectual property? Is it registered? So that is showing us that for people to invest in your business, for people to put money into it, to make it grow at the scale that we want it, we want to be sure that your intellectual property is protected. And that's what we see as international best practice. We see that a lot of international brands have their IP protected to the last. That's because when investors come in, when people bring in their money, they want to be guaranteed that this money is going to be plowed into a business that is sure that they own the asset. So yes, of course, for investment purposes, it really helps a lot. It also just really helps you realize that you are trading under a name that you are allowed to. We've seen many times that brands would trade for almost 10 years. And after 10 years, they'd be surprised that somebody else is owned that particular trademark, and they're served with a cease and desist to stop trading, and they have to change their name. So a lot of African brands have actually lost their brands because they didn't protect those names. So yes.
But then it raises another question, because of all the reasons you mentioned before, they didn't protect their name. And this is why kind of I asked that, but if they would have protected their name, do you think, because I think that all those businesses and all those brands have closed, it's also because we've never really seen an African brand fighting and taking anyone to court. Because I do believe that a lot of African brands are being copied. They influence trends more than people agree to admit it as well. But so far, we've never seen anyone take anyone to court and really stamped like very, very publicly that this is an African brand, this is what we do, and how good they are. Or do you have any recall of a brand having taken someone to court?
Yes. So yeah, to be honest, I think that jurisprudence really, going to court, things like that, we do not see a lot of brands taking that. And it's understandable because the cost of going to court, hiring a lawyer, looking at their business, investing so much, that's an investment really, and not every business has that financial capacity to make that investment. However, yes, I think that the courts also are willing to enforce the rights of of these brands if protected, if they've done right by the law. I am sure that like the courts obviously would be in their favor, but we don't see them moving to that direction. Usually when we see cases of infringement, they're either settled out of court. They either settle out of court, obviously, or come to an agreement with the infringer. But we don't see people outrightly suing. However, I know that there was a brand who lost their brand. There was a fashion brand who lost their company. That's Green Grassfield, and they got it back after they went to court, and they got a lawyer on board. But again, internationally, we're seeing that other brands too are going to court to enforce their rights, and they're getting favorable judgment for protection of their brands internationally. But that's not seen on the African continent.
Yes, I remember. Grassroot? No, what's the name of the brand? Grassfield.
Yes, Grassfield.
That's it. I remember this brand. It was very public, wasn't it? They went on Instagram, they had campaign about it. They explained that they had an investor who actually took over the brand without them really understanding what was going on. And they were absolutely on the brink of losing it. And people were really, it really got to people because that brand meant a lot for so many people, and kind of, you were saying also earlier on that there's so many African fashion brand that have opened and closed because they couldn't set up the business properly, and that really led me to another question, which is kind of tied up to consumer and trends. We know that, nowadays, when it comes to the consumers, everybody wants transparency. Brands are now being built in public, very like on Instagram and TikTok. But, there's something that we don't really talk about. It's the Made in Africa product. And this kind of Made in Africa is becoming more and more prevalent because we have more and more and more entrepreneurs that produce on a fantastic level in Africa. But now, if you are an entrepreneur and you want to promote this made in Africa, what are the tools? What are the legal tools that can help you to ensure that I'm so sorry. My mic was off. I'm going to start again. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
So this is very interesting what you're saying, because that's true. We've seen a lot of brand entrepreneurs opening and closing business, and it leads us into something else: the made in Africa product. Nowadays, consumers want to know everything, and you're right. When Grassfield got taken over by their investor, they took immediately to social media, and they fought their case through Instagram and TikTok and X and all those platforms. Nowadays, what legal tools can help to ensure that African and entrepreneur and the Made in Africa product meet the expectation of being able to I wouldn't say fight, but retaliate when they are being taken over by investors?
I think first and foremost would be, legal tools. You would think of having the right knowledge for the brand. So a lot of brands need to understand that it's their business, and as much as a lawyer is important, you have to have certain residue of legal knowledge. You should know how a contract works. You should also know that before you sign an investment contract, you should get a lawyer to review those terms, right? Because it's one thing to understand in plain English what this contract is about, but it's another thing to understand how that contract affects your business and your obligations towards your business and their rights also, right? But if you talk about generally made in Nigerian or made in African brand, I think that is a term that is getting more common. And we have to start looking into geographical indication laws. Africa does not exactly have very robust, GI laws, but it's quite important because it shows the origin of certain products, right? And that's why we are excited about the AFCTA, because they also address what qualifies as a made in Africa product. Because now a lot of brands have to introspect and look at themselves. Are we making made in African products, or we're just importing clothes from China and just putting the labels on it, basically our brand names on it? So it's almost like we need authenticity, and for us to guarantee that, we have to have laws that shows the minimum standard of what qualifies as a made in Africa brand, right? There's also the importance of registering your trademark as a business. It shows that product originates from your company, and any other thing is a counterfeit. So it's important that you secure, trademark registration and all the other design registration, copyright notifications, things like that, and have proper labeling. Those are tools that I know that brands can use to show that their product is made in Africa of a particular standard. But again, the government also has to put in laws and policies that encourage even the production of made in Africa product, because it's not the easiest thing to do on the continent, especially with the fact that a lot of consumers sometimes want cheap products, and they are fighting secondhand clothing, because you see that a lot of us are dependent on that particular product. So it's important that we create an enabling environment for made in Africa products, so that we can actually have access to it and it's affordable to actually make.
I absolutely agree. Do you think that traceability and labeling could really revolutionize the African entrepreneurs to their advantage? Like, do you think that if the African entrepreneur to really, 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 I'm so sorry. They're making noise next door, and I'm completely being distracted by that. They are reading like crazy. Let me change room for 1 second, because I'm trying to see what they are doing and talking to you at the same time. Do not go anywhere. I'm just going to move room so we are not disturbed by the noise. Yeah, give me 1 second.
Okay.
I am so sorry. That noise is absolutely all over the house. So I'm going to start again. 1, 2, 3. This is extremely interesting. Which kind of lead me to my next question. Do you think that traceability and labeling could become decisive competitive advantages for African brands?
Yes, I actually think that with the complex nature of how supply chain in fashion and in production is generally, if we are compelling brands, especially international brands that buy raw materials from Nigeria, from Ghana, from Kenya, to basically states where all of these things are sourced from, it would sort of like help, because again, right, made in Africa, what qualifies as made in Africa product is basically that, you are able to source XYZ material from us. So basically, when people source raw materials, resources from African continent, we can basically see it that, okay, we're not just lost in the entire supply chain, but there is a pointer that this raw material, this thing came from far Kano, this thing came from Kenya, this thing came from a remote village in XY. So it gives due credit to the people who actually sourced these things. There's also the very fact that it would prevent, will I say, greenwashing, right? When you say something is not is sustainable, when you say something is made in Africa, but you can't actually show or prove that you got it from Africa, or it was sourced from our raw materials, right? So it would prevent the will I say, fake identities or greenwashing generally in the fashion industry, right? And yeah, I think that it would also help with strengthening our cultural heritage, because if you look at the fashion industry, Africa's contribution to the global fashion market is our raw materials, practically, right? A lot of fashion brands source their raw materials from us. And yeah, beauty brands also source their materials from us. So if they are compelled to state where their sourcing happens, or the people who play in their supply chain, it means that, there is a pointer to the source, the very source of their product, where they get the raw materials from. So they're sort of like getting credit, and it preserves our cultural heritage, because it will support our geographical indication laws and other production that comes here, and it would not exactly, it will help to sort of like prevent cultural appropriation, because we know where it came from, and there's no confusion as to
right.
where.
Appropriation. I had never thought about it this way, but that's absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah.
So you talked a lot about the specificality of the geographic problem. Like this country, Nigeria, has no regulation with other or like or treaties with any other country. The French country do it this way and that way. So the geographic chaos of the regulation is also not at the advantage of the entrepreneur, I guess.
Yeah, it's really not at the advantage of the entrepreneurs, because it's quite difficult to do when you tell, because IP laws, right, are territorial in nature. And what that means is that the IP law that would apply in Kenya would not apply in South Africa. So I protect my trademark in Kenya, and I'm only protected, in that region. But if you look at how that fashion brands are trading nowadays, where that's, again, like I mentioned, somebody can just be in Kenya and be selling to people in Lagos, Nigeria, and just importing and things like that. So I can just import a brand from Kenya and start, replicating their design here in Nigeria, and then I'll claim that they're not protected here, or they do not have a registered IP. That's not exactly in favor of the entrepreneur. So we have to think collectively on how that we can come together to unify our national IP offices. And I think that that's what the Africa Free Trade Area is trying to do, but again, it's still slow when it comes to implementation, right? We're still trying to figure out how that is going to work, because sometimes if you look at it, many countries have also not even straightened out their administrative process when it comes to IP registration individually. So now merging almost 50 countries together to see how we can do it, it's quite cumbersome. But then if you look at this, the person who would be at the brunt are people who are creating on the continent.
That's really, I really love this conversation, because I'm learning so much. We all know that the roads in Africa could be way better, and therefore, the transportation of goods could help with doing cross-border business. But I don't think this is the only thing that stops the continent African to make business internationally. There is also all the laws and the international regulation. So how does those international regulation for export hinder the business on the African continent or in Nigeria?
Yeah, I like to look at it like this, right? You know how difficult it is for us as Africans to move within the country. You have to get visas. You have to get, you have to get visas. If I want to go to South Africa, I have to get a visa. If I want to go to only a few countries that you can travel free, you have access to. But even if you have access, the expense that you would incur. As human beings, we go through that. As Africans, we go through that difficulty in moving around Africa. As an African, I think about it. I'm like, how many countries have I even been in on the African continent? It's even easier, and people make that statement a lot. It's easier to travel out of Africa than to travel within Africa, right? If human beings can face that kind of problems, imagine products and services, right? It's difficult to move products from one place to the
It is. It's really what makes it's such a war with transportation. We've seen brands having to build from scratch their own float of motorbike to go and deliver cross country because they had no other ways to do so. Or it was too expensive to do a 2 hours journey from Ghana to Togo, for instance. And that, when you start a business, you're not thinking that you're going to also have to build an airport, you know, otherwise you'd never start. Um, but I think like the regulation and all oh, hello? You were disconnected for a
yes, I
second.
was.
That's okay. Let me count to three and we're going to start again. And I'm gonna ask you a new question. Yeah. One, two, three. Like, yes, we've seen like all over, we had so many um, testimonies from different entrepreneurs that when they started a business, they were just wanted to do beauty or just wanted to do fashion or even tech, and they realized that actually the ecosystem in terms of the logistic was so poor, they also had to contribute toward that. And when you start a business, that's not really what you have in mind. But I want to go back. I want to dig a little bit more with like some example of that, not case study, but kind of. Um, so, which international framework should African brands prioritize to expand globally when they operate from the continent? What do you think is the best process?
Oh, okay. And what's the best process? To be honest, I think first it is doing the homework of registering in their home countries, right? And then as they try to expand across Africa, it's to look at the largest market, look at the biggest market, and try to establish or protect their brands there. And then also, they would also have to look at their supply chain, and look at how their manufacturing is happening, a lot of the African brands manufacture, for example, in China. So obviously, when you're thinking about expanding globally, you have to protect the source where the product is coming from. We saw that happen during, the US and China, Trump introducing a very high tariff, and then we saw that manufacturers were just calling out brands and people that they protect, that they produce in China. So what that means is that you want to protect the source of your product. If you're going to be manufacturing in other places, right, where your manufacturers are, you should be thinking to register your business, thinking of protecting your trademark, also trying to protect your trademark in different translations. A lot of times, a lot of brands would just protect their brands in English and forget that, different English is obviously not the only universal language that is spoken. In China, they have, Chinese, right? And certain times when, infringement happen, you see that they do a translation of, your name from English to Chinese, and then they send it in Chinese. So obviously you have to think about protecting even translations of your name, right? So you look at China, because it's a very large market, large economy. You're seeing how you can also protect in that market. Then you look internationally, what are the biggest markets and biggest markets of the world? Where are the big companies? Where are my customers base coming from? Usually the US. So obviously registering and protecting your intellectual property in those regions is important. So it's almost like a very huge strategy. You just have to look at your brand growth, where your supply chain is extended to, so that you can be protected there, and then also look at where your people who are buying your product, where they are residents, the most, and you start protecting in those, regions.
Now that's very true. And for that to be able to do all of this, you also have to be very good at spotting opportunities and kind of at also looking at doing business in a very innovative way. And I think that for Black entrepreneur, especially African entrepreneur, because you guys are so young on the continent, you are very prone to innovation and creativity when it comes to do business. So I just really was wondering, how can innovation in legal framework, whether through digital tools, regional policies, or even new form of IP protection, create opportunities for African creative?
So there's a lot of innovation happening in terms of digital fashion. You can see fashion technology and things like that. And I think that it's creating a lot of opportunities because many people can now access. You don't have to be a traditional designer to build a brand, but that also on its own, as amazing as it is also posing a lot of risks to brands, because we've seen that many times a lot of infringers and counterfeiters will create caricature of the already physical product. We see that happen internationally, where somebody would create an NFT that looks like a design of a popular, brand, right? So what that means is that we need laws to also catch up with it. IP laws does not strictly talk about digital rights, right? And, protection of NFTs and all of that, things. So it's important for the laws to also extend to have that in contemplation. There's also the very fact that, on the positive side, there's also like blockchain and how that can be used to authenticate designs, right? To prevent counterfeiting. You can
Talk to me more about blockchain. What do you think about blockchain solutions?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing solution, especially for the fashion industry, right? Because one of the problems that we've had and what we hear people say is that fashion is a redesign of something that's already been in existence before. So obviously, how do you trace the owner and things like that? But blockchain obviously is now showing us that you can actually trace basically the ownership of a particular design, right? It's almost like a digital ledger where records of transaction relating to a particular, raw material or design or something is stored. So we don't have to be confused as to who created what or what year something was created. So basically it provides traceability as to who owns it and how that right was, transformed or passed down, right? And also it really helps with showing, again, IP ownership, right? And also ensures that people, get paid for their right, because as you're making a replication or a duplication, there's a record that is kept of that replication. And that really helps, because we need that. Because fashion, for example, I can see something off the internet and decide that I want to replicate those things and claim that I'm the owner, and also claim that, oh yeah, I'm in Nigeria and nobody is seeing me, right? We're forgetting that there are records of these things and can be very, very public. So yes, that's the benefit of technology in the fashion industry. There's also the hardware part, where we are seeing that there are a lot of, machines coming into fashion. You're seeing that fashion now can be also, that shares a borderline with health products, right? We see people coming up with fashion product that also helps with blood regulation, you checking your heart rate, cancer prevention and detection, things like that. So yeah.
And a lot of people in the beauty industry, they say, I'm doing beauty, but really I'm a tech company, because it goes absolutely hand in hand, because maybe they started their company with an application completely offline, and then they've seen opportunities to take this application to extend the service of this application offline. And then people, it's a second wave of it's an additional segment of consumers that discover them through the offline event or wherever it could be. But then they didn't realize that initially they were a tech company. So I think that, and it's similar between fashion. I think that beauty and technology are merging together, and same with fashion. Like, fashion is held by technology a lot. So if you had to name few, because you've been doing that for some time, you've been on the legal side for some times now. What would you say are the top 3 legal innovation that help African entrepreneurs to build their ecosystem and scale their brands?
So legal innovations. Okay. So I mean, legal innovation, basically access to legal services, right? I genuinely think that there are a lot of people who are coming up with solutions to really help. First and foremost is, as much as we frown over it, but I think ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, whatever, that is, has helped a lot of brands now. I feel like so I'm saying this because, as basic as it is, because sometimes we like to think about technology in the very complicated aspect, but that alone helps us, because when they have a problem or when they have a transaction, the first thing they do is ask ChatGPT. And of course, ChatGPT will say, oh, this is what it is, but I think you should consult a lawyer. So I think that has really helped in creating that, enlightenment, and just basically telling you that, okay, these are the legal issues that you should have. And many times you see that because of the prompts that you get, right, they are sort of like scared. Oh my God, ChatGPT has said this. That means that I have to be very conscious. I need to get a lawyer, or I need to, sort of like be very careful of this transaction because this XYZ has been flagged. So yes, I think that has really helped a lot of founders, to be the starting point of how they get services, legal services. And there's also a lot of contract tools that have been created, right, where people can easily have contract negotiation and, negotiate contracts just on the platform, right? That has also helped. And there's also the very fact that a lot of people, even on the African continent, has built solutions where they can also register their IP across borders, right? I know of...
interesting.
Yes, I know of... some legal solutions. I'm trying to remember their name right now. But yes, basically on your platform, you can have your tax compliance, updates. You can get trademark registrations done, because it's almost like a syndicate of various lawyers across the various countries that you have. So if you have issues in Guinea-Bissau, for example, there's a lawyer that will help you solve those issues, right? help you with your trademark, help you with things like that. If you're thinking of expanding to the US also, I mean, with the platform, you can really access that on-demand services. So yes, technology has made it easy for us to feel like Africa is just one country and we're all together. Those are things that I know that off the top of my head are solving the access to legal services problem.
And there is a very, very obvious thing that we haven't talked about. It's your book. Tell me everything about your book. What's about?
Oh, okay. So Fashion Law in Africa is the first comprehensive book on, legal issues in the fashion industry. I mean, one of the inspirations to write it was because we didn't have an Afrocentric approach to legal issues on the continent. When people talk about law relating to the creative economy or legal issues relating to fashion, beauty, and the creative economy, they usually just talk about issues that happen in the West, which of course is not that is right, but it's not exactly reflective of what is happening on the continent. Like I mentioned before, for example, our contribution as a continent to the global fashion and beauty market is our raw materials. Just recently, I think that the president of Nigeria banned shea seeds to be exported, right? So our export is quite important in the production of beauty products and the production of fashion products. But we do not talk about the legal issues that surrounds all of those things. We don't talk about our cultural heritage. Africa has the most, cultural tribes in the world,
Yes.
right? We have a lot, over 3,000 or 2,000 that
Ooh.
exist. We're very diverse, and we have a lot of conversations around, what is culture, who owns culture. Recently, even on Twitter, you would see that there's a conversation about appropriation within Africa. You can be an African and still appropriate within Africa. It's not only when a foreign brand comes between us. I mean, a foreign brand from maybe Europe or US comes that you see it's appropriation. What of people, even Nigerians, right? Within ourselves, we say, oh, somebody has appropriated Yoruba, somebody has appropriated Igbo. And really, we've not had real conversation around regulations and legal, conversations basically on that. So yes, that's why the book exists, to just really bring the African perspective to the legal issues in the fashion industry, and also just really help fashion brands see the basic things that they have to think about when they are thinking about their fashion brands and how they play in the international market, right? We talk about a lot of things. We talk about things like secondhand clothing and how that, we are almost in the second era of colonization, because we are seeing that there's a lot of dumping done on the African continent. We have conversations around that.
It's absolutely mad. Has to stop.
Yes.
It's really and this is part of regulation.
Yes.
This could be really helped with the change of regulation. Like if the regulation were to be like, we want to protect the coast and we want to keep the beach clean, it's really something that has to do with the legal that could be part of legal innovation. But really, Bernice, thank you so much for all those gems. It's time for us to wrap up.
Yeah.
It was fantastic that you could share your vision, your book with us. Where can we find that book? Where can we buy that book?
It's available on Amazon for you to purchase, right? So I can share you the link and give some tabs to it, but it's available on Amazon. Just search for Fashion Law in Africa. I'm sure it's gonna pop up.
Thank you very much. I'm definitely going to have a look at that. And it was really such a privilege to have met you, bumped into you on LinkedIn because of your book and sharing all your wisdom with us. Intellectual property is really a real leverage that will transform the African continent and its heritage into lasting wealth. Thank you very, very much. And we'll speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. 1, 2, 1, 2. Hi, Bernice. Thank you so much for joining us with your unique expertise at the intersection of flow, intellectual property, and the creative industry. We are excited to explore how legal framework can support the growth of Made in Africa in fashion, beauty, and design.